Welcome to the Journal. You're not alone if you're worried about the financial meltdown. So is George Soros, my first guest, one of the world's best known and most successful investors who makes billions in times of boom or bust. He's been warning for years of a financial meltdown fueled by easy credit and sleepy regulation. Now he's out with this timely book, The New Paradigm for Financial Markets, the credit crisis of 2008 and what it means. In the interest of full disclosure, you should know that I served 3 years on the board of George Soros' foundation, the Open Society Institute, dealing with such issues as a free press, the rule of law, and human rights. But I've had no involvement in his political activities and nothing to do with his business interests, unfortunately. It's good to see you again.
Good to see me.
Let's imagine for a moment that we're not in a New York studio, but we're in Neely's Barbecue Stand in Marshall, Texas, my hometown, and we're surrounded by people I know. People who have lost half of their 401ks in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And what they want to know is, does this financial meltdown represent the end of the American dream as they have known it?
No. I think it's got nothing to do with the American dream as such. There has been some kind of an ideological excess, namely market fundamentalism. And for the last 25 or so years, and now that world is collapsing.
What do you mean, market fundamentalism?
It's that markets will correct themselves, that you should leave it to the markets, and there is no need for government intervention in financial affairs, letting market run rampant. And that doesn't work. The markets have the ability to adjust, and they're very flexible, and there is this invisible hand. Yeah. But it is also prone to be mistaken. In other words, markets, instead of reflecting reality, they always look at reality with a bias. There's always a prevailing bias of call it, optimism, pessimism. And sometimes those moods actually can reinforce themselves, so that there are these initially self-reinforcing but eventually unsustainable and self-defeating boom-bust sequences or bubbles. And this is what has happened now. This current economic disaster is self-generated. It was generated by the market itself, by getting too cocky, using leverage too much credit, and it got excessive.
You use the word disaster.
The financial system is teetering on the edge of disaster. Hopefully it will not go over the brink, because it very rarely does. It only did in the 1930s. Since then, whenever you had a financial crisis, you were able to resolve it. This is the most serious one since the 1930s. There hasn't been one as serious as this. Unfortunately, the authorities are behind the curve. They are reacting to these crises as they emerge. One thing leads to another. One market after another gets into difficulty, and they react to it. And they don't quite understand what's hitting them, so they are not anticipating and not gaining control of the situation.
Well, this is what's interesting. Why wouldn't the government be able to look at what you looked at and see what's coming?
Because actually they have been working on false premises. This sounds very strange, but there's been this development of this belief of market fundamentalism, and particularly the idea that markets always revert to the mean, and deviations from the mean occur in a random fashion, and you can calculate it, and you get a nice distribution, and you can anticipate it, and based on that you can manage your risk. And that actually was based on a false idea. Namely, the markets are self-correcting, because the market moods have a way of affecting the fundamentals that markets are supposed to reflect. And there's always a divergence between our perception and what actually exists. For instance, take the simplest situation, namely housing. Banks give you credit based on the value of the houses, but they don't seem to somehow understand that the value of the houses can be affected by the amount of credit they are willing to give. Now, we've developed these fabulous new ways of securitizing mortgages, which has made credit much more amply available. And we've been able to calculate risk, and therefore we were willing to give more and more credit. And that has pushed up the value of the houses. Also, of course, Greenspan kept interest rates too low too long. And so you had very low interest rates, easy credit, and house prices have been appreciating at more than 10% a year for a number of years. And the willingness to lend actually increased. There was an insatiable appetite for these newfangled securities.
Yeah, which nobody understood, really.
Which they didn't properly understand. And there was always a separation between the people who generated the mortgages and packaged them and sold them to you, and the people who owned them. So nobody was paying attention to the quality of the mortgages, because they didn't have an interest. They collecting fees, and then there were other people holding the mortgages. Right. And that was not factored into those instruments. The idea was that by distributing risk, you actually reduce risk. But by separating the principal from the agent, you actually greatly increased the risk. And that was not reflected. And the rating agencies didn't realize it, so they gave AAA ratings. And then a few weeks later, those AAA bonds became practically valueless. And that's what has happened.
So how does a system become deranged like that, so separated from reality, like an individual who goes insane because he or she separated?
Well, sometimes we get carried away. I mean, you know, let's say in the Middle Ages, people were religious. And so they had tremendous discussions about how many angels can dance on the eye of a needle. Now, if you believe that angels can dance, then that's a legitimate question. And this is exactly what has happened here. You thought that you could slice and dice and engage in this kind of financial engineering, and it became very, very sophisticated, and it got carried away.
What happened that we lost control?
There was a failure of regulations because they couldn't understand these new instruments. But they said, oh, well,